Everyone, Josh here. So doing a quick unexpected video on this V10 TDI. This wasn't how I wanted to spend my long weekend, but I gotta get this fixed. It is a no crank, no start issue again on this green Touareg. So we're gonna fix it right. So I'm gonna show a quick video underneath the hood on what it's doing and go over how we're gonna fix this. I'm just gonna set it here on the rad support so we get a nice view of the sun. Of course it starts right off the bat. The very first crank you could hear it go really slow, and then the starter kicks out, and then it will actually start and crank and go good to go. So the issue I'm having is I've got about a high score, about 15 tries before it actually would start, I believe. So I can hear the solenoid in the back for the back battery, it clicks, and I can hear the solenoid on the starter click, but then there's no revolution. It doesn't try starting at all. Worst so far has been about 15 tries before it goes, but it's always went. But it seems this entire week it's been getting worse and worse, where it's usually 2 or 3 tries, and now it's getting to the 15 tries, and now obviously it starts right off the bat. So I'm fairly certain it's the solenoid on the starter, so we're going to do a starter rebuild, and we're going to try and remove it in frame here. So I'm going to get this into the garage and then see what's going on. Okay, so I got it inside here nice and comfy, so I thought I'd just go over a little bit of the history of this car. So originally I bought it from a guy that had a no crank, no start issue, and he didn't want to pay to get the engine taken out to replace the starter. So that's how I ended up with it. And my very first YouTube video I did was trying to find the starter and cleaning up the bad connection at the solenoid itself. That's why it didn't start. So I couldn't find any videos on where the starter was on this thing. So that's kind of where I'm at today, making these videos to try to hopefully help people in the future with these issues. But anyway, so that was a bad connection at the starter. Everything started up after I cleaned it. How I got to it then was I removed everything off this side. Like I got the charge pipe off, the one down underneath, and then I held the engine up from the oil pan with a block and took the engine mount off so I could get at it. I'm not sure how I'm gonna go about it here, but I guess we're gonna find out. Hopefully the engine doesn't have to come out. Before you condemn your starter, you should make sure you've got 2 good batteries. You got the one underneath your seat and one back in the trunk. When you're cranking it, you should hear the solenoid in the trunk click. Make sure that's all good. You also want to make sure you've got good connections, obviously. So I did a video this past winter about doing a voltage drop test on all the different connections and stuff like that, because I've had bad connections and I've had to replace the alternator wire on this thing too because it was corroded. Just do all the work before you have to do a starter. So looking online, one guy said a shop did it in 4 hours, remove and replace the starter. Apparently the Volkswagen book time is 19 hours to take the engine out and replace the starter and put it back in. Another post said Volkswagen's book time is 30 hours to take the engine out and in, which I don't know what to believe. I don't know how we're gonna do this yet, but we're gonna find out. It is what it is, so make sure it's actually the issue before you start doing this. So we're gonna kind of I'm gonna get it jacked up here. I'm gonna get the tire off. Probably get the liner in here, out of here. So I don't know what to expect here yet. Okay, so I got my tire and inner fender well out. So this is a good time to say, I'm not gonna list all the tools you need. I'm assuming if you're working on a V10 TDI, you've got a nice assortment of Torx and Allen and triple squares and all that good stuff. So yeah, I'm just gonna say that here now. The other thing is this might run into some poor filming quality just because of how shitty these spots are. So I'm sorry for that, but hopefully it gives you the rough idea. So I'm looking in, here's my tie rod. So I'm looking in behind the back of my lower control arm. So here's my turbo actuator. You can see the 3 bolts on it, and also the horseshoe clip that holds the actuator onto the actual linkage. So I think I'm going to get this out of here, and in behind it, but you probably can't see, it's all just dirt. There's a charge pipe. The lower charge pipe just above it, and it's bolted to the turbo. I had that off on my last video, and I think I'm going to take it off here now too. just to make things a little bit easier to get in at the starter. As far as the turbo actuator, that C-clip's probably going to turn to dust if it's never been off, so make sure you get an assorted C-clip kit, and also make sure you lube that bushing as well as the one on the other side, because as you can see, you've got road grime blasted up in there, and if you live in a salty area, that's going to seize up and cause turbo actuator codes, which I've already done a video on. So let's get that out of here. Okay, so with that actuator unbolted from the turbo, you can actually see the, well, not very well on the camera, but you can actually see the starter. You can see the, I think that's the starter solenoid hanging up there with the air with the heat blanket on it. So I'm kind of optimistic about this. I'm having a hard time getting the actuator connector undone because it's all full of dirt. But anyways, I've got to go to a dinner party and I've got to get cleaned up here. So I'm putting this on pause till tonight. So hoping it wants to fall out of here a lot easier when I get back. Okay, back at it here. So we've got the turbo actuator out of there. That connector just has the two little pinch tabs on the outside where you just kind of squish them together. They were all full of salt and stuff, so a little bit of persuasion and they came off. So now we're going to do this charge pipe. So we've got two bolts there that are in really bad spots, and then the front flex pipe. The issue is I think I've got a little bit of nature's Loctite on one of these bolts, and I'm not talking about rust. I think might be slightly cross-threaded from the last time I had it off, so I don't think it's gonna be fun. So we're gonna do that here now. Okay, so we're making some progress. I'm hoping you can tell. Like, I've got a leak on, I guess, cylinder 2 exhaust by the looks of it. So everything's kind of sooty, and then the valve covers are kind of damp, so it's leaking oil down into the soot, mixed in with, I do a lot of gravel road driving, so oily, gravelly, sooty, greasy mess. So yeah, so I'm pretty well right back to where I was with my very first video on this Touareg. The air box is out of here, all your charge pipes, your turbo inlet, and that lower charge pipe is out of there. That lower charge pipe is the biggest pain that I've had here. So I didn't cross thread it, I stripped it out. So I remember that now. I don't know what they were originally. Got a feeling they were T30s. Like Torx, but they are now triple squares. So you want a nice assortment of deep Allens, Torxes, and triple squares. The main issue is this pipe that bolts to the block, so it kind of sits like, so your frame rail's right here and your turbo inlet is right here, so you can't see this top bolt. You need skinny fingers to kind of feel it. And the issue is, you can see you've got no space for Torx like that, because the shoulder is going to hit the aluminum. You're not going to get onto the bolt square, and then you end up stripping it out. So this top one, surprisingly, is the easy one to get at. This bottom one, it kind of sits like this. So you're fighting the frame rail, and you're fighting this kind of pointing down at the bolt. So even with these extra deep, narrow bits, you're still not 100% on their square. You can kind of see all my marks. So this bottom one was the one that I stripped out on reassembly when I first got this thing. I'm kind of really regretting cheaping out and not doing the starter when I had the engine out, but I guess hindsight's 2020. Anyways, so charge pipe, all that stuff is off, and we can actually see the starter solenoid now. So yeah, the starter's in kind of over there. I've got the nut off the starter solenoid, but the issue now is this wire is tight. There's a clamp, and it's wedged between the engine block and the differential. So that's the next thing, because I cannot slip that cable off. So I gotta cut down an Allen bit to get in there. So we'll get the wire out of there, and then I'll show where all these bolts are, and hopefully we can get this thing out, because I don't know, it's hard to judge the size and how it's all gonna fit out. I'm hoping I can leave that engine mount because I really don't want to have to support this engine.
Okay, so you can see the solenoid nicely up here, the cable, and it goes to a tube. Let's get my finger in there. A tube right there where it kind of gets fed through, and then you see a bolt right there, and you can see this is the diff housing, and then that's the block. So it's really not very fun to get at. We got to cut down an Allen to 5 mil. Well, let's sit down here.
If you have a set, the snap-on T30s are really close in size, so I'm going to try that instead of wrecking one of my Allen bits.
Okay, so I had to cut one down anyways. The Torx was starting to strip. And of course it was stubborn the whole way out. So you get it 90% of the way out, and you gotta walk the rest of the way out by hand. The issue now is I can get the cable off, but there's another bolt that goes in. So that one went up. There's another one just to the front going in. I'm not gonna be able to get it on camera, but I think I get in there with an Allen bit and a ratchet and get that one out, and then I get the cable right out of there. The cable's got some green kind of poking through. I guess I can't see it now, but there's some green poking through, so I think the cable's kind of questionable. So I'll probably be replacing that as well, or making up a new one here. But today is tomorrow, or I guess tomorrow is today, so we're just past midnight, so I'm gonna go to bed and worry about this tomorrow morning. Okay, so I'm at a bit of an interesting point here. I can't find the other bolt for the power wire clamp. I can sometimes feel it, but then I go to put a bit on it and I lose it. It's just a tricky spot. So we're at a certain point where we need to figure out which direction we're gonna go. A fellow V10 owner said the starter won't fit out with the engine mount in here. So I've got two options here. I can do as I did previously and put a block on the oil pan and take this engine mount out to give me some more room up in here. I should be able to slide the starter back and out here, and maybe have to move this, I'm not too sure. The other option is dropping the subframe and diff, and that would give us a whole lot of room to get up in there. The issue with that is I've obviously got a lot of stuff that comes with it, because that would be differential steering rack, brake, suspension, all that good stuff. And the other thing is the engine mount, the aluminum subframe, which would be this one here. This is the steel one here. The aluminum one is bolted just back there. Focus. It's bolted there, and it's also sandwiched between this frame here. So I would think 2 out of 4 would be able to hold the engine up okay, but aluminum doesn't like to flex. So it might be a drop the subframe and then get this bolt back in to hold the front of the subframe up, because there's quite a bit of weight. The whole engine's hanging off the front side of that. So I think I'm going to leave the subframe here, and I'm just going to take this engine mount out. I've got fairly small hands and I've made it this far, so I'm hoping the engine mount out of there, I can get this to squeeze out of here. Okay, so I've got the sway bar out of here so I can get this in a little bit nicer. I got this on the outside corner, nice blocks all the way across. So I'm not saying this is what you should do, but this is what I'm doing. If you're familiar with any lowered Volkswagens with aluminum pans, it doesn't take very long before the aluminum pan turns into an aluminum sieve and you have all your oil on the ground. So this is not really ideal. I don't remember how I had it last time, but I remember it really, really sketchy, especially when you're going to be taking this mount out so that there's nothing really holding the engine up. I feel like I might have pushed off of here, but again, that's a really thin chunk of aluminum to be holding up a V10, so I think this is the way to go. So I'm gonna get this mount loosened off and see if I can get this shimmied out of here. Okay, engine mounts are out. So the trick to these is this kind of sits on an angle and you've got your manifold right above it. So you can't slide this out unless you go way high with the engine, but then things are kind of getting pretty sketchy pretty quick. So I unbolted the bottom here. You can kind of lift this up and kind of get this out of the hole. So if you kind of go like this, you can get this thing fished out of here. This top actually comes off too. It gives you a little bit more wiggle room. And yeah, get this out, get this kind of shimmied out. And then this engine mount comes out real nice and easy. So now, got a nice clear shot of the starter here, and I imagine that's your crank position sensor right there. So wonderful place for that as well. But my plan here is I don't want this to drop, so I'm going to put a 2x4 on top of the steel frame here and then just kind of set the pan down onto it before things slide. So there's that hidden bolt. Oops, you just kind of see it there. So I'm gonna have to get this loom off of that and then get that bolt out and get that out of here yet. We've got a triple square there underneath the starter, coming from the front backwards, so we'll get that popped out here right now. Okay, so if we remove the bolt that's in the transmission lines, you can pull the bracket for the starter wire down enough where you can actually get your triple square on there. It's a 14mm triple square. So now let's get our brake bar on there and just kind of go through the window here and break her free. Okay, so looking underneath here, I have a few less parts than some people might, so it's a little bit easier for me. So I believe that is where the bolt that we just took out is threaded into. And I believe that one up there is the other one that we need for our starter. So that is just beside the turbo. So if you've got a cat up there, it will be a little bit trickier to get at. I don't quite remember how tight that is, but that's the bolt we need. I'll zoom in one last time. So that is, where's my hand even? That one there, not that, that one. Lots of extensions are key here. I think I've got it out there. And swivel sockets. There we go. Let's see what it looks like up front. Look at that. So I'm gonna put the camera down so I don't break this sensor off trying to get this thing out. So, and it's out. So the trick would be keep the solenoid closer to the engine. It's got to clear the turbo inlet, so it's got to kind of come rolled in there still, but really not that bad to fit out of there. Everything seems good. There's a roller bearing in the transmission for here, so I'll put a little dab of grease on there on reassembly. But now we are good for rebuilding. So I think I'm just gonna end this video here. It's out. Oops. It's out, so if you can get it out, you can obviously probably get it back in. If there's any tips or tricks that I ran into, I'll include it before this point in the video. So as far as time-wise, if the shop quoted and actually you only paid for 4 hours or 4.5 hours to do the starter in frame, that's a steal of a deal. Even with the strip bolts and stuff like that, I think I'll be under Volkswagen's 19 hours. So I would expect somewhere between that 10 to 20 hours to do the starter. But yeah, it's not extremely terrible. It's definitely doable in frame. So there's the proof. So removing the engine, if you're really into a good groove, I think you'd save a little bit of time replacing the starter as far as like
actual time to replace it, but I think it'll be a lot more time actually getting the engine in and out than you would have just doing this in frame. So if you got to do a starter, I think this is the way to do it. The sketchiest part is holding the engine up without the engine mount in on this side. So the oil pan hasn't cracked yet, so I'm thinking it's fine doing it this way. Just use common sense, and obviously I'm not responsible if you crack your oil pan doing it. But yeah, I'm gonna do the rebuild video separate because I think this is getting pretty long here now, so I'm just gonna end this here, and thanks for watching.